The sound of screeching tires and a furious woman's voice woke me at 6 o'clock in the morning, an hour when only farmers and lunatics were supposed to be up. I stumbled onto my porch, still in my pajama bottoms, to find the HOA president, Cheryl, red-faced and barking orders into a walkie-talkie, while two burly guys attempted the impossible, towing my beloved 1949 vintage Massey Ferguson tractor with a dinky flatbed truck that looked like it couldn't even haul a bicycle. I leaned against the railing, sipping my coffee slowly, watching the absurdity unfold like it was premium Saturday morning entertainment. Their toe straps snapped almost immediately, sending one of the guys sprawling into the neatly manicured bushes Cheryl had once fined me for not trimming correctly. And right there, in the rising sun, with chaos erupting in slow motion and Cheryl screeching like an off-key fire alarm, I decided, if they thought they could mess with my tractor, they had no idea what storm they had just unleashed. My name's Jack Reynolds, a retired mechanical engineer, a proud owner of 3 acres of paradise on the edge of this HOA community, and the unwitting enemy number 1 of a board that took itself way too seriously. When I first moved here, the land was raw and rugged, perfect for restoring my old tractor and planting a few orchards. I had no interest in being part of the HOA nonsense. Unfortunately, the HOA had other plans. Cheryl, the self-declared queen of the community, viewed my tractor like it was a rusted old junkyard monument, spoiling her little utopia. Never mind that my tractor was polished to a shine with new paint and hand-restored chrome trim. To Cheryl, it wasn't about looks, it was about control. The trouble started small. First, it was courtesy letters taped to my door about non-conforming agricultural equipment. Then it became fines, which I ignored because legally they had no right to enforce them on me. My property had existed years before the HOA was even incorporated. But facts didn't stop Cheryl. Facts only made her double down. The more she failed, the more furious she became. I made a game out of it, really. I framed one of her angry notices and hung it right above the tractor's steering wheel, just for a laugh whenever I went to start it. Still, even I was a bit surprised when Cheryl escalated from passive-aggressive letters to outright trying to steal the tractor off my land. That morning was the culmination of months of quiet warfare. She thought she could call a private towing company, sneak onto my property, and make the problem disappear. But my Massey wasn't going anywhere. For one, it weighed more than 3 of their trucks put together. For another, I had installed heavy-duty wheel locks, disconnected the battery, and rigged up a hidden GPS tracker just in case someone got bold. I'd built security systems for million-dollar homes in my past life. Protecting a tractor was child's play compared to that. Standing on my porch, watching the frantic scene below, I couldn't resist the urge to intervene. I ambled down to the fence, raising my coffee cup like I was toasting them. One of the tow guys wiped sweat from his brow and mumbled something about needing a bigger rig, while the other tried to attach a chain around the front axle. I cleared my throat, loudly enough to catch their attention. "You fellas sure you want to do that?" I asked, casually. "She's a stubborn girl, might tear your truck in half before she budges." Cheryl spun around, eyes bulging. "This is an HOA-authorized removal, Jack. You're in violation. You have no right to interfere." I shrugged. "Actually, according to the county register, I'm not technically part of the HOA jurisdiction. My land predates it by about 40 years, and you're trespassing." Cheryl's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish out of water. The 2 tow guys looked at each other, visibly nervous now. Still, one of them, probably worried about losing his paycheck, gave it another shot. He revved the flatbed engine and yanked on the chain tied to my tractor's front axle. The truck barely moved, but the front bumper groaned loudly before the whole tow rig lurched backward, smoke pouring from the tires. The chain snapped again with a sharp crack, whipping into the air and narrowly missing Cheryl's expensive designer handbag, which she clutched to her chest like a life raft. It was about then that I made a call. First to my lawyer to get the legal wheels turning, then to my cousin Rick, the sheriff for this side of the county. Rick loved a good HOA horror story, and I had a feeling he'd enjoy this one immensely. Within 15 minutes, a black and white cruiser rolled up, sirens flashing, Not because of an emergency, but because Rick wanted to make an entrance. He stepped out, took one look at the disaster scene, and whistled low. "Well, well, well. Looks like y'all are trying to rustle up some cattle that don't belong to you." Cheryl tried to talk over him, throwing around words like community standards and aesthetic rights. But Rick held up a hand. "Ma'am," he said, drawing out the word in that slow, infuriatingly calm southern drawl, "unless you got a court order, a property lien, or about 3 tow trucks bigger than that Tonka toy over there, you're all committing trespass and attempted theft." The color drained from Cheryl's face. The 2 tow truck guys backed away from the tractor like it was radioactive. Rick took a few statements, scribbled out a few citations, and then gave me a wink as he handed Cheryl a notice. She was being officially charged with unlawful trespass and malicious property interference. The look on her face was worth more than the entire HOA's yearly budget. I spent the rest of the morning buffing the tractor's hood and sipping more coffee, as Cheryl was forced to call off the tow truck and retreat in humiliation. But even as I watched her stomp away, high heels clicking furiously on the sidewalk, I knew this wasn't over. Cheryl wasn't the kind of person to take defeat quietly. She would come back, and next time she'd be even more desperate and dangerous. And when she did, I'd be ready. Because if they wanted war over a tractor, they were about to find out they'd picked the wrong farmer to mess with. The sun was barely climbing over the horizon the next morning when I heard the rumble of heavy engines rolling down the street again. I didn't even bother grabbing my coffee this time. I just threw on my boots and headed outside, already knowing what kind of circus was about to unfold. Sure enough, Cheryl was back, but this time she had upgraded her equipment. Instead of a flimsy flatbed, she had hired a massive tow truck, the kind usually reserved for flipping 18-wheelers off highways. Standing beside it, she looked smug and triumphant, arms crossed over her chest like she had just personally captured a fugitive. Her 2 loyal HOA security guards, the same ones who couldn't tow a barbecue pit without sweating buckets, flanked her like mall cops on steroids. I stood by my fence and watched as the giant tow truck maneuvered closer to my tractor. The driver hopped out, gave a polite nod to Cheryl, and then turned to inspect the situation. His face fell almost instantly. The tractor sat there, gleaming under the morning sun, completely unmovable, with every wheel still secured with custom steel clamps I had designed myself. He circled it twice, scratching his head, and then walked over to me, shaking his head in disbelief. "Sir, is this yours?" he asked, not unkindly. I nodded. "It is." He glanced over his shoulder at Cheryl, who was tapping her foot impatiently. "Look, man to man, there's no way we're moving that thing without risking major damage. And if I break anything, my company's on the hook." "She said you approved the removal." I laughed so hard I nearly doubled over. "Nope, she's lying." He blew out a breath and rubbed his forehead. "That's what I thought. I'll tell her we're not touching it." Before he could turn away, Cheryl stormed over, jabbing her perfectly manicured finger in his direction. "You're under contract. Remove that eyesore or I'm suing your company for breach." The driver gave her a deadpan look. "Lady, you lied to me about having permission. If I touched that machine, I could lose my license, my truck, and my business. You want it moved? Get a court order." Cheryl turned a shade of purple so deep it was almost impressive. She stomped and shrieked about HOA bylaws, neighborhood standards, and how I was single-handedly lowering property values across the subdivision. The driver simply climbed back into his rig, shook his head and pulled away, leaving Cheryl standing there in a cloud of diesel fumes and defeat. Her security guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they could disappear into the sidewalk. As entertaining as all of it was, I knew it was time to shift gears. Cheryl wasn't going to stop. She was the type of person who, when faced with a locked door, wouldn't try to find a key. She'd just keep ramming her head into it until something cracked. If I stayed passive, she would eventually escalate into something truly stupid. So, I made a decision right then and there. I was going to go on the offensive. I pulled out my phone and made 2 important calls. First to my lawyer, who was already half amused and half exasperated with the amount of paperwork Cheryl was generating. Second to my insurance company. I wanted official documentation of the attempted thefts, damages, and trespassing incidents. I wasn't just setting the stage for a lawsuit, I was setting the stage for a show. Later that day, I took my tractor for a little ride. I maneuvered it carefully down the gravel path, humming to myself, and positioned it right across the main entrance to the HOA community. My property was technically adjacent to the private access road, and I had every right to park my equipment along the boundary line. I wasn't blocking the public road, I was blocking their privately maintained gate. The one that Cheryl had insisted was the HOA. Without access through that gate, everyone had to take a much longer, bumpier back route through an unfinished development road. It didn't take long for the chaos to start. At first, it was a trickle, confused residents honking their horns, wondering why the gate wouldn't open. Then it became a flood. Cars backing up, tempers flaring, people getting out and shouting across the field. Cheryl arrived within minutes, driving her silver Lexus like it was a battering ram, and skidded to a halt in front of the tractor. She leapt out, heels sinking into the gravel, face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "You can't park that here," she screeched. Tipped my hat and gave her the friendliest smile I could muster. "Oh, but I can. I'm protecting my property from further unlawful tampering. Got it all documented. Would you like me to show you the court-approved property boundary lines?" She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped when she saw the papers in my hand. Official documents, map, affidavit. She wasn't stupid enough to keep digging once she realized she was way out of her depth, but she was petty enough to try and bluff her way through. "This is harassment," she yelled, turning to the gathering crowd of residents. "He's harassing the whole community." No, the crowd, however, wasn't as sympathetic as she had hoped. Several people muttered complaints about the constant drama the HOA had caused lately. Someone shouted, "Just leave the man and his tractor alone." Another person added, "At least he isn't raising the HOA dues for no reason." Cheryl's face twitched. She was losing the court of public opinion fast, and she knew it. Desperate, she pulled out her phone and called for reinforcements. Within 20 minutes, the so-called HOA security squad arrived. 3 overweight guys wearing matching polo shirts and cheap radios. They tried to look official, but they clearly had no idea what to do when faced with a farm vehicle twice the size of their golf carts. One of them, the brave soul, approached me with a clipboard and said, "Sir, you're in violation of emergency access codes." I raised an eyebrow. "Emergency?" He hesitated, flipping through his papers like he might find an emergency hidden in there somewhere. "Well, it could be an emergency," he said weakly. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. I gestured toward my cousin Rick, who had pulled up in his cruiser again to keep an eye on things. Rick leaned against his car, sipping a soda and watching the spectacle with obvious delight. "Go ahead," I said. "Tell the sheriff that." The security guy paled, mumbled something about needing to check with his supervisor, and quickly retreated. Cheryl was left standing alone, seething and shaking with impotent rage. The best part came when one of the residents suggested we turn the standoff into a block party. Within an hour, people brought out lawn chairs, coolers, and even a portable grill. Kids ran around laughing, someone started playing music from their truck, and there, towering like a monument to stubbornness and common sense, sat my beautiful red tractor, the most popular thing in the neighborhood that day. As I leaned back against the fence, enjoying a burger and watching Cheryl stew in her own fury, I realized I wasn't just winning. I was changing the tide. For the first time, the neighborhood was laughing with me instead of against me. Cheryl had lost control, and there was no getting it back. Not after this. Not after the tractor became the unmovable symbol of everything wrong with her little dictatorship. But I also knew Cheryl. She wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. She was already plotting her next move, and whatever she had planned, it was going to be big, desperate, and very, very stupid. The morning after the impromptu block party, I woke up to the sounds of clanging metal and shouted orders drifting down the street. I had barely rubbed the sleep from my eyes when I realized Cheryl was back at it again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had escalated things beyond anything I could have imagined. A professional towing crew equipped with an industrial-grade crane truck and a support team in matching uniforms had set up shop at the entrance. Cheryl stood at the center of it all, arms crossed and wearing a grin that practically screamed victory. For a moment, I just stood there, dumbfounded. I had to admire her persistence, even if it was about as smart as poking a sleeping bear with a stick made of bees. I wandered out toward the gate, hands shoved deep into my pockets, trying not to laugh. A few neighbors had gathered again, this time staying a safer distance back, watching with a mixture of horror and amusement. The crane crew worked methodically, setting stabilizers, running heavy-duty cables, preparing to lift my tractor like it was a wrecked vehicle on the side of the highway. The absurdity of it all made me chuckle. Cheryl caught sight of me and smirked like she had already won. She gestured broadly at the setup as if to say, "Checkmate." I waited until the crew had everything ready, then slowly stepped forward. The lead operator, a grizzled man with a hard hat and clipboard, walked over to me. "Sir, we've been contracted to remove this tractor. Is there going to be a problem?" And smiled politely. "Well, that depends. Did the person who hired you provide a court order authorizing the removal of my property?" The man frowned. "She said she was the property owner's representative." I chuckled. "She's not. And if you lift so much as one wheel off the ground without a court order, you'll be facing charges for grand theft, destruction of private property, and trespassing." He looked over at Cheryl, who was frantically waving her arms and mouthing, "Go!" at him. He turned back to me, eyes narrowing. "You're serious?" I nodded. "Dead serious. You want to lose your truck, your business, maybe even your license?" The man didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel and stalked over to Cheryl, waving his clipboard angrily. I couldn't hear every word, but the general gist was clear. No court order, no move. Cheryl's face darkened to a color somewhere between eggplant and rage-induced purple. She stomped, screamed, and finally, in a fit of desperation, ordered her HOA security guards to seize the tractor themselves. It was like watching a bad sitcom unfold in real life. The guards, bless their incompetent hearts, tried to look intimidating as they surrounded the tractor. One of them even pulled out a pair of plastic handcuffs, like he thought he was about to arrest me. I leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching them argue among themselves about who was going to actually climb onto the tractor. Eventually, one unlucky soul was nominated. He scrambled up the side, grabbed the steering wheel, and immediately set off the custom security alarm I had installed. A deafening wail, louder than a fire truck siren, erupted from hidden speakers under the seat. The guard jumped back like he had been electrocuted, tumbling onto the ground with a yelp that drew laughter from the gathered crowd. Rick, my cousin the sheriff, arrived not long after, sipping his ever-present soda and grinning like he had front-row seats to the best show in town. He strolled casually over to me. "Heard the circus came back to town." I shrugged. "A bigger tent this time." He looked over the scene. The crane truck idling uselessly, the HOA security guards in full retreat, Cheryl shrieking into her phone like it might magically solve her problems. Rick shook his head. "You pressing charges?" I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. "Not yet. Let's give her just a little more rope." Rick chuckled. "Fair enough." While Rick kept an eye on things, I wandered back to the tractor and, with great ceremony, unfurled a large, professionally printed banner across the hood. It read in bold letters, "This tractor is protected by local, state, and federal law. Tampering will result in criminal prosecution." The crowd erupted into cheers and laughter. Cheryl, seeing her latest plan crumble spectacularly, retreated to her Lexus and slammed the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. She sat there, fuming, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. It was clear to everyone that she had lost yet again. But the best part of the day came about an hour later. Someone, I still don't know who, uploaded a full video of the morning's events online. Within minutes, it spread like wildfire. Local news stations picked it up. Memes started appearing with captions like, "Tractor 1, Karen 0, and when HOA meets real country energy. By evening, the video had over 2 million views. News vans began arriving, setting up cameras, interviewing neighbors and me. I gave the most cheerful down-home interview I could muster, explaining that all I wanted was to be left alone to enjoy my land and my tractor without constant harassment. Cheryl, on the other hand, refused every interview. She even tried to block the news crews from entering the HOA property, which only made her look guiltier. The residents, many of whom had stayed silent during earlier confrontations, were now openly supporting me. Some started petitions to recall the HOA board. Others decorated their lawns with miniature toy tractors in solidarity. One guy even parked his own riding mower at the entrance in mock tribute to my blockade. In the following days, the pressure on Cheryl mounted. Residents demanded emergency meetings. Legal threats loomed. Sponsors for the HOA's annual gala event pulled out, citing negative publicity. Every move Cheryl made only seemed to dig her deeper into the hole she had created. She tried to claim victimhood, blaming me for orchestrating the embarrassment. But the videos spoke for themselves. No amount of spin could undo the images of her screaming, stomping, and ordering illegal seizures like some deranged despot. Privately, I knew the fight wasn't quite over. Cheryl was cornered now, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous. I could practically see the gears turning in her head every time our paths crossed. She was plotting something reckless, something that would be her final downfall. I could feel it coming, like a storm just beyond the horizon, but I wasn't worried. I had my tractor, my documents, the law on my side, and now the goodwill of almost the entire neighborhood. The only thing Cheryl had left was her pride, and that was cracking more visibly with each passing day. I smiled to myself as I walked back to the house. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the field. Whatever move she made next, I would be ready. And if it led to her final meltdown, well, I had a feeling it was going to be one for the history book. The fourth day, after the viral video explosion, started off suspiciously quiet. Too quiet. I had lived long enough to know that when someone like Cheryl went silent, it wasn't because they had given up. It was because they were planning something bigger, something reckless. I spent the morning doing normal things, like fixing a loose board on my porch and trimming the hedges along the side of the house. But my eyes kept drifting toward the entrance, where my tractor still sat proudly in front of the HOA gate like a loyal sentry. It had become such a local legend that people passing through would stop, take selfies, and honk in support. It was comical how one stubborn machine had turned an entire neighborhood against its own tyrannical leadership. And yet, a part of me stayed on edge. Cheryl wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Around noon, I spotted her silver Lexus creeping down the road. She parked farther away than usual, almost out of sight, and stayed in her car for several minutes, probably making frantic phone calls or second-guessing herself. I was half tempted to walk up and tap on her window just to mess with her nerves, but I stayed back and observed. Eventually, she got out, straightened her blazer, and stormed across the field toward the tractor, like she was leading an invasion force. This time, she wasn't alone. She had 2 people with her, one carrying a leather briefcase and the other rolling a camera rig behind him. My stomach twisted slightly when I realized what she was doing. She was bringing the media to her side. The camera guy set up quickly, ignoring the smirks from the neighbors lounging on their porches with lemonade and popcorn in hand. The man with the briefcase handed Cheryl some papers, and with a haughty lift of her chin, she marched right up to the tractor. The camera's red light flicked on. Cheryl turned to face it, adopting a fake, sympathetic smile that would have made a used car salesman proud. She cleared her throat dramatically and then launched into the most delusional, laughable speech I had ever heard. She claimed the tractor was a public safety hazard, that it was blocking emergency access, and that the HOA had been forced to act because of my belligerent refusal to cooperate. She talked about community values, safety, harmony, all while standing in front of a machine that had caused exactly 0 problems until she decided to make it one. She even held up a fake emergency injunction that was nothing more than a bunch of meaningless papers she had printed herself. hoping no one would notice the lack of any official seals or signatures. The neighbors, who had gathered in larger numbers now, were having a hard time keeping a straight face. Someone coughed loudly into their fist. "Liar!" And several people laughed openly. Cheryl's smile faltered, but she soldiered on, babbling about her deep concern for the residents and her unwavering commitment to community standards. When she finally wrapped up the speech, she turned dramatically toward the tractor and announced that it would be peacefully and lawfully removed for the greater good. The camera guy zoomed in as she walked to the tractor, pulled out a cheap padlock cutter from her handbag, and tried to snip through one of the heavy steel wheel locks. The cutter snapped clean in half. The sound of laughter rolled through the crowd like thunder. Cheryl stood there for a moment, frozen, clutching the broken cutter like a magician who had just realized her wand was a stick. Then, furious and humiliated, she tossed the broken tool aside and started yanking on the wheel lock with her bare hands, grunting and cursing under her breath while the camera captured every glorious second. That was when the sheriff's cruiser pulled up again. Rick got out, strolling casually toward the chaos, his hand resting lazily on his belt. He gave the camera a polite nod, tipped his hat to the neighbors, and then addressed Cheryl without even raising his voice. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to step away from the private property." Cheryl spun around, wild-eyed. "This is community enforcement. I have the authority." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Authority granted by who?" She brandished the fake injunction like it was Excalibur. Rick took it from her, scanned it, and then, very slowly and deliberately, tore it in half. Here's a fraudulent document," he said calmly, "which means you're now guilty of attempted fraud, vandalism, trespassing, and criminal mischief. Again." Cheryl's mouth opened and closed uselessly. The camera guy, sensing a way juicier story, panned his rig toward Rick and zoomed in on Cheryl's panicked face. A few neighbors actually started chanting, "Arrest her! Arrest her!" half jokingly, half hopefully. Rick sighed, pulled out a pair of real handcuffs, and gently but firmly turned Cheryl around. She screamed about lawsuits, civil rights, and conspiracies, but it didn't matter. Rick cuffed her, read her rights, and led her toward the cruiser like a child being dragged out of a toy store. The camera guy practically bounced with excitement as he captured every humiliating second. Cheryl's screams grew fainter as Rick closed the door and drove her away, leaving the neighborhood stunned into momentary silence. Then the cheers erupted, louder and longer than before. People hugged each other, high-fived, and shouted thank yous in my direction. Some even came up and patted the tractor like it was a war hero returning from battle. It wasn't just the residents who noticed either. Within hours, the video of Cheryl's arrest went viral again. News outlets started reporting on the escalating saga, framing Cheryl as a tyrant who had finally been brought down by her own arrogance. Memes flooded social media. Cheryl in handcuffs. Cheryl throwing a tantrum. Cheryl breaking the cutter. The phrase "tractor justice" started trending nationally. By that evening, the HOA board was in full-blown crisis mode. An emergency meeting was called, and for the first time, it wasn't a boring room full of rule-following busybodies. It was packed to the walls with angry homeowners fed up with years of Cheryl's nonsense. I didn't even need to attend. I just sat on my porch with a cold beer and listened to the roars of outrage echoing through the night air. By midnight, it was official. Cheryl was removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. A recall petition against the rest of the board had gathered more than enough signatures. Change was finally coming. Real change. And it was all thanks to a stubborn old tractor, persistently determined old man, and the ironclad refusal to be bullied into submission. The neighborhood had chosen sides, and they had chosen the side of common sense, humor, and a little bit of good old-fashioned stubbornness. But I knew there was still one thing left to do. Cheryl might have been stripped of her title, but her damage lingered. I wasn't just going to let it all fade away. It was time to make a statement. A final, unforgettable celebration of everything we had fought for, and I knew exactly how to do it. The morning after Cheryl's official removal felt different. The air was lighter, almost celebratory, like the end of a long and bitter winter. Neighbors waved at each other more freely. Kids rode their bikes around without being glared at by patrolling HOA busybodies, and for the first time in a long while, it actually felt like a neighborhood instead of a gated kingdom under siege. But I wasn't about to let the moment just pass quietly. After everything that had happened, after the battles, the chaos, the laughter, and the victories, it deserved to be properly marked. I wanted to make sure no one ever forgot what a stubborn old tractor and a community standing together could accomplish. So, I decided to throw a party. But not just any party. It was going to be the first annual Tractor Freedom Festival. I spent 2 full days planning and getting help from half the neighborhood. Flyers went up overnight. Kids handed out invitations door to door, and the local businesses I had long supported chipped in with food, drinks, and supplies. One guy brought a whole trailer full of fireworks. Someone else organized a live band. Before long, the preparations snowballed into something far bigger than I ever expected. What started as a simple barbecue idea grew into a full-blown block party with games, contests, and even a charity tractor pull event, where people could bet on how far they could drag a mini replica of my Massey Ferguson. The entire community threw itself into it with a kind of energy I hadn't seen in years. By Saturday afternoon, the entrance where my tractor had once blocked the gate was transformed into a festival ground. The gate itself was wide open now, unlocked permanently by a unanimous vote from the new interim HOA board. Long banners stretched across the entrance, reading, "Freedom through horsepower," and "We stand with Jack." My tractor was parked front and center, polished until it gleamed under the sun, with a small platform built next to it for speeches and performances. Kids swarmed the area, climbing onto a specially built tractor playhouse someone had whipped together overnight. Food trucks lined the street, dishing out everything from burgers and tacos to fresh lemonade and ice cream. I took it all in, standing by the tractor, my heart swelling in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just a celebration of my little victory over Cheryl. It was a celebration of something bigger, a kind of quiet rebellion against petty tyranny and the reclaiming of a spirit that too many neighborhoods had forgotten. No one should have to fight for the right to live peacefully on their own land, but when forced to, there was no sweeter reward than seeing everyone come together like this. Rick showed up in his sheriff's cruiser, lights flashing in a festive, non-threatening way. He got out with a huge grin and handed me a t-shirt that said, "Official Tractor Security Officer," printed across the front. I laughed so hard I almost choked on my lemonade. Soon after, the mayor himself arrived, making a surprise appearance, shaking hands and congratulating the neighborhood for setting an example for other communities dealing with their own overreaching HOAs. He even gave a short speech, talking about the importance of standing up for property rights and personal freedoms. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, it was time for the main event. I climbed up onto the little platform next to my tractor, tapping the microphone to quiet the crowd. Hundreds of people had shown up. Residents, friends from neighboring towns, even some of the local news crews who couldn't resist covering the next chapter of the story. I started with a joke about needing a bigger tractor just to haul all the attention we had gotten, which got a good round of laughs. Then I got a little more serious, talking about how important it was to stand up to bullies, no matter how small the fight might seem. I thanked everyone who had supported me, even those who were too afraid at first, but found their voice when it mattered most. I thanked my tractor, too, for being the most stubborn, loyal hunk of machinery a man could ever ask for. And finally, I announced that all proceeds from the festival, from food sales to the charity tractor pull bets, would go to a local organization helping farmers and small property owners fight legal battles against unfair regulations. The cheers were deafening. A few people even hoisted me up onto their shoulders for a moment, which was slightly terrifying but hilarious. Afterward, the band kicked off a set of country rock music, and the festival swung into full gear. Bonfires were lit, marshmallows roasted, and laughter echoed across the fields. Even people who had once sided with Cheryl were now laughing and dancing, freed from the fear that had hung over them for so long. As the night deepened, we ended with the fireworks show. Someone had gone a little overboard with the fireworks budget because what we got was less a neighborhood celebration and more a full-blown small-town 4th of July extravaganza. The grand finale was a series of bursts that spelled out freedom in the sky, and when that last echo faded, the crowd erupted into applause that seemed to go on forever. Near midnight, as people slowly began to head home, a few neighbors and I sat around the dying bonfires, trading stories and laughing until our sides hurt. The tractor sat nearby, bathed in the soft glow of the remaining embers, a quiet, shining monument to everything we had been through. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought about Cheryl. After her arrest and public humiliation, she had packed up and left town almost overnight. Rumor had it she sold her house at a loss just to get out faster. A few people felt sorry for her in a distant, abstract way, but most understood the truth. Cheryl hadn't been a victim. She had been a bully who finally faced consequences, and in the end she had defeated herself. As I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the stars, I realized something else, too. The tractor might have been the symbol of the fight, but it was never really about the machine. It was about the simple right to live peacefully, to mind your business, to build a life without someone constantly trying to control every inch of it. It was about standing up and saying, enough was enough. The Tractor Freedom Festival became an annual tradition. Every year, people gathered to celebrate not just that one victory, but every small win in every small town where common sense and community spirit triumphed over entitlement and petty power. And every year, I made sure my old Massey Ferguson sat right at the center, shining proudly, a reminder that sometimes the biggest battles are won not with anger or violence, but with stubbornness, humor, and a little bit of horsepower. Long after the last guest had gone home that night, I sat alone next to the tractor, listening to the crickets and the soft rustle of the trees. I patted the tractor's hood affectionately and raised my last cup of lemonade in a silent toast to a future where freedom, stubbornness, and a good sense of humor would always have a place to park right in front of the gate.